Relationship and falling in love is not safe. Every relationship but one is going to end, usually.
The ways that you were describing security in that moment, they were not the same at all as the ways that I described security.
I don't necessarily need emotional skills, security, intimacy in order to survive. I do need it to thrive.
Are both people in the partnership committed to staying or not? The truth is that security can't really exist unless commitment exists. Welcome to the Well Worship Man podcast, where men come to build unshakable presence, become the rock in their relationships, and build a legacy that lasts beyond their years. Here, we explore the path to mature masculinity through humble power, daily devotion, and unwavering integrity.
Thanks, baby. Before we dive in today, make sure you follow the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, or subscribe. If you're on YouTube, leave us a rating and a review. It helps us out a ton. What are we talking about today, baby?
Today, we are talking about creating security in relationships.
Yeah. And I think this is a topic that is so needed to be addressed. It's so fundamental to creating a lasting, loving relationship. And it's something that a lot of couples just miss on, not always through negligence, but simply through a lack of awareness and skill. I share a lot that relationship is just not something that we were taught at. And most of us, if left to our own devices, are pretty bad at it. And so today we hope to share some insights, some awareness, some skills, and some real tools that can help couples create security in relationship.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with what is security.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define security in relationship?
Security in relationship to me means that I understand where we're at. I'm not confused or wondering what's present within the relationship. I don't wonder about how you feel towards me. I don't wonder within myself if I'm making the right decision to be in this relationship or not.
Mm-hmm.
I also trust you to not hide anything from me. I trust that when we're out in the world, that we have the tools and the love and the skills that when life introduces variables that can put a strain on the relationship, that you and I are going to prioritize restoring connection first before fulfilling any of the other responsibilities that we have.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking defining the difference between security and safety also feels important. And what you're describing as security feels true. And there's a lot of talk about safety right now because of nervous system regulation and trauma healing and all of these beautiful things. So safety to me means I'm not at risk of harm.
Mm-hmm.
And security to me means a little bit more like everything's taken care of and there's not a question, versus, safety being more like someone's going to act unpredictably, or they're going to act predictably, or they are going to create physical harm or not create physical harm, or my needs are met or my needs aren't met. There's like a safety theme there. And we talk about in order to create connection and intimacy, someone has to feel safe. But then for a relationship to really flourish, there has to be security. Even if I feel safe, but I'm wondering about, what the next phase of life is going to bring, or if I'm going to stay, or if you're going to stay, or someone's going to leave, or if we're not going to be on the same page in the next phase of life, then that's not really going to allow the relationship to be nourished and to flourish either.
Yeah. Every relationship but one is going to end, right? Usually. And security alludes to there being security beyond the relationship remaining in the same orientation, right? Security to me is if one partner feels like the alignment is off, that they're able to have that conversation in a loving way and actually not hide that, because it's not secure for a partner to continue a relationship that's expired within their own being.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when we think about safety, like everybody wants to experience safety in a relationship. Every woman wants a man to make her feel safe, right? And we talked about this yesterday, is that relationship and falling in love is not safe. You define safety as there not being any harm or any chance of harm or hurt occurring. And the facts are that when you enter into the challenge of relationship with someone else, that there is going to be hurt and harm. I don't mean physical harm, but I mean moments of rupture. I mean moments where you're not attuning to each other emotionally, moments where you miss one another. And so safety is inherently not there in relationship, right? In the frame that we're talking about it. But security says that even when there is hurt and harm, we are going to make a concerted effort to return to connection. And we're going to make an effort to build the skills and the self-awareness that's necessary for us to be able to do that successfully.
Yeah. So where you're talking about security, the first thing is commitment. It's like, are both people in the partnership committed to staying or not? And there's a lot that comes into play when there's rupture with people's survival responses. Like, am I going to stay or am I going to go? And this is something that like I've had to work through over time of just my own survival response being to run,
Mhm.
like I got really good over time of just burning things down, like this isn't aligned and it's not going to get aligned. And so I'm just going to leave it. And for a time in my life, the courageous thing to do was to leave. And that shifted because, in my own story, Spirit was like, okay, like she'll leave if she needs to, but will she stay? And so working through our own wounds and through our own survival responses and our trauma and relationship ruptures from past relationships is kind of an essential piece to being able to go into commitment and say, even if my flight response comes up because we are in a rupture, I'm not going to run.
Mhm.
And security can't really exist until both people know, regardless of what happens, I'm going to stay.
Yeah, I think we can talk about some of the mistakes that people make that inhibits them from creating real security.
Mhm.
And you just mentioned one, which is one of two things. At the drop of a hat, at the sign of any challenge, I'm just going to leave,
Mhm.
or I'm going to threaten
Mhm.
leaving. That completely removes any foundation for security to be there. Because as we've mentioned, security means that I am going to stay in the discomfort. I'm committed to working through this, at least giving it my all in working through it.
Part of that too, like the reason why security can't exist unless commitment exists, unless devotion to healing ruptures exists, is because if someone is afraid that the other person is going to leave, then they automatically cannot act authentically. They're like a power dynamic is created in the partnership. And the same thing is true if, I'm always threatening leaving, then in my own system, I'm not going to potentially work as hard or as authentically to move through a discomfort or an uncomfortable conversation or a misstep because I know I have this back door. And so until both people are willing to say, no, no matter what the rupture is, like no matter how uncomfortable this process gets, I'm staying, that security can't exist. And the big thing I think that people do, I don't know that do wrong is necessarily the right words, but where they limit themselves as they're learning boundaries or as they're starting to say, I need this. And if not, then I'll go, is they stay in that phase forever. They like constantly are threatening leaving, which keeps the relationship itself in a space of no safety and no security. And if I'm not feeling safe and I'm not feeling secure, then the ruptures that occur can't really repair. There's always this risk of loss.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, when you set a boundary and you say, or you express a need, and you're like, I need this boundary honored, or I need this need met, or I'm going to leave. When either of those things doesn't happen and you don't leave, you're actually creating a lack of security.
Mhm.
Security would be, I told you what I needed and you dishonored it. And I told you that I would leave if that happened. And I'm going to leave
Mhm.
because that was my commitment and that was my word. So beyond the relationship ending, if the two of you are going to be in friendship or relationship in any way, any relationship that you have words need to be honored
Mhm.
in it, right? And if you can't do that, if over the course of the relationship, there are words that aren't honored, commitments that aren't kept, there's really no chance of any type of relationship after the breakup,
Mhm.
right? So sometimes loving is letting go. And when you really love somebody, even if you're not together, you want them to continue to be in your life, right? And so for that to be a possibility, real security needs to be held, even if that means staying secure in your word to leave if a need isn't met.
A huge piece of that is also don't say you're going to leave unless
Yeah,
you're going to follow through on
right.
it, which we talk about a lot. Integrity isn't necessarily just following through on your words, but only speaking the words you plan to follow through on. So if you're not actually prepared to release the relationship, if a need isn't met, then those words really shouldn't be spoken, because once they're spoken, if they're not followed through on, trust is broken with yourself and in the partnership,
Mhm.
and then every word that's spoken after that of, I need this thing or whatever, there's a learned behavior of, well, this person's never going to leave, or internally, I don't have the strength to leave. So it doesn't really matter if my needs are met or not.
Mhm.
And so reclaiming, I think as a culture, we need to reclaim the value of saying, I'm thinking about leaving or I'm going to leave if, because that threat is used so much and not followed through on. And it really is a huge source of lack of security in
Totally.
partnerships.
Yeah. Yeah. Empty threats, false ultimatums, and a couple other mistakes people make in trying to create security is hiding things,
Mhm.
blaming. All of those things create a lack of security because when those are present, the partner who's on the receiving end of those things will edit their authenticity. And another definition of security is that I can be fully myself here. I can speak my truth, I can speak my needs, speak my boundaries, and you will still remain here with me.
Mhm.
If you would, please share the Gabor Mate quote about authenticity and
Mm.
attachment.
Yeah, when we are young, we sacrifice our authenticity for attachment. And the healing journey is basically reclaiming our authenticity over our attachment. And the reason that occurs is because when we are children, we need to stay connected to our caregivers in order to survive. And so the attachment becomes primary. But as adults, once we can manage our own needs and pay our own bills and feed ourselves and all of these things, then the overuse of attachment to authenticity becomes dysfunctional. And we need
Mhm.
to actually reclaim that authenticity for healthy relationships to occur.
Mhm. Yeah, and when that attachment gets threatened through a lack of security, we will cease to act authentically in order to maintain the attachment. And that type of behavior creates a lot of shakiness within a relationship and a lot of lack of authenticity of I need to be something or not be something in order to remain in connection or attachment with my partner.
Mhm. Something that you mentioned earlier was about, you know, basically, I don't know exactly the way you worded it, but it was akin to this where it's like, I need to know who I'm in partnership with.
Mhm.
That is a level of security. And if you're not being authentic or I'm not being authentic, then no one knows who they're actually in relationship with. And just like we've talked about in our truth podcast, like truth will rise to the surface and so will authenticity over time. And so if I'm not able to show up authentically, then we think we're in partnership with someone. And then authenticity starts to rise to the surface. And now everyone's confused because, you're not the person I thought you
Right.
were, et cetera, because now you're being who you really are. And
Mhm.
so the authenticity piece is something that creates security because I know that you are who you say you are.
Yeah. And that brings up a great point that security isn't something that you just start creating with someone once you're in a long term and committed partnership. Security is something that starts getting created from date one. You're not married to continuing a path with that person, but for any chance of a healthy relationship on date one, any guy and any woman, that should be something that they're thinking about. How can I create security just on this date? And the way to do that is to show up authentically, to give the person that you're sitting across the table with, or whatever the date is, an accurate representation of who you are as a person, so that if the relationship doesn't continue, you don't have to get to that really painful place of, as you described, you're not the person that I thought you were. And there's nothing more destabilizing than that.
Mhm. We spoke about in a previous podcast, one of our relationship podcasts, about you don't have to be perfect to enter into a relationship, but being honest about the fact that we resonate our matches to us is important. And that's coming up now with this conversation about security. It's like the more secure I am in myself, the more I will be able to create a secure partnership. If I'm not secure who in my own beingness, in my own authenticity, I'm more likely to fake reactions or to fake needs or fake responses or whatever. And that's going to create that instability in the partnership because you're not sure. Versus if I'm secure and convicted in who I am, then I give you the opportunity to say yes or no. And
Mhm.
as you continue to say yes to my own beingness and I continue to say yes in yours,
Yeah.
that foundation is built.
Yeah, I'm getting this visual of, when there's a lack of authenticity in a relationship, it's not so much trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It's that round hole is one day a round hole, one day a rectangular hole, one day a trapezoid hole. And so this person that's trying to relate to you can't quite fit in because you're not providing a consistent signal of who you are, what you need, what you want,
Mhm.
true authenticity.
Mhm. So that's one area of conversation about security. And then I wanted to also talk about what we were mentioning when we talked about this together of just the way that one partner might be thinking they're providing security versus something else. So, what are ways that different people might communicate about security and where's the miss?
Yeah, I think that question leads me back to something I wanted to touch on again is a mistake that people make in trying to create security is hiding things that are hard, things that they think will damage the relationship, things that they believe will threaten the security of the relationship. They
Mm.
actually hide
Mhm.
and keep to themselves. And that's the wrong thing to do. It might maintain some semblance of safety or an experience of safety in the relationship by not having those hard things or those harmful conversations, but it doesn't create real security because over time those things fester. And whether that particular thing comes out in a scandalous or surprising way, something will come out of, oh, you've been hiding things from me. I don't know exactly the room that I'm in. I don't know exactly where the furniture is or where the walls are because you've been hiding things, and nobody can really experience security in that place.
That's really interesting because that really paints a better picture of the difference between safety and security.
Mm.
It's like if I'm worried about my safety, my subconscious and my nervous system is going to be acting in a certain way to ensure safety, ensure that, the attachment isn't lost, ensure that the life that I currently have with this partner is sustained at all costs. But the security functions from this other space of like, is there true connection? Is there true authenticity? Are we both on the same page with where we're going?
Yeah, this conversation of safety and security makes me think about, parenting. It's like safety would be, putting your child in a padded room and helicopter parenting and putting like big, like floaty style airbags all over their body to make sure that they never get hurt.
Hmm.
Right. But really, the more practical, beneficial, and growth inducing form of parenting would be, I'm going to let my kids make a mistake and they're probably going to get hurt because they're kids and they're throwing themselves off of things and maybe they break a bone. But what's important is if they do get hurt, the parent is right there to soothe them, to provide the care, to help them get to a place that's more healthy or help them get out of pain, right? And so in relationships, it's not about padding your relationship and hiding things so that there's no pain. It's that when there is pain that you're able to be in it together, to care for each other, to understand what needs to change. And that actually generates a relationship that grows over time instead of one that just stays padded and dead, honestly.
Hmm. Yesterday, when we talked about this, you asked me what I thought security was.
Mhm.
And I used a lot of these words of like knowing who I'm in relationship with and knowing that we are committed to repairing things that come up and really focus more on like the emotional realm. And when you described
Mm.
security, I'll just have you repeat it. Like, how are most
Yeah.
men viewing security?
Yeah. Well, we're on this trip right now. We've been traveling for about 4 weeks. We have 2 more weeks. And so, security, how I spoke of it is, we have shelter every night. We have a place to stay. We have food. We know that we're not going to be left out in the streets or on a dock at night with nowhere to go or without a ride, right? I've planned the rides, I've planned the planes, right? We know that we're going to be carried through this trip in a way that doesn't induce any physical insecurity, right? I've
Mhm.
done my absolute best to make sure that we don't encounter any real danger or mishaps or situations where we feel physically insecure. And that's what I think a lot of men think of security as. Oh, I'm providing security for my family. I
Mhm.
work hard, I make enough money so that my family is fed, so that my wife or my partner and I can go on dates, and so that we can have time to connect, so that there's no financial instability, or there's no physical danger, or I have a gun in the house, or I know how to roll jujitsu. If anything went sideways in life, I could protect
Mhm.
my person.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you started talking about that, I was like, wow, that I mean, I have expressed gratitude for all that you put into this trip. And it really just clicked for me that the ways that you were describing security in that moment, they were not the same at all as the ways that
Mhm.
I described security. And this is definitely a miss in the way that some partnerships communicate. There is a lot out there that will share that when partnerships start to fall apart, one of the things that is cited is that the ways that I was showing love stopped being appreciated. And there seems to be an imbalance in the way that the masculine pole and the feminine pole are viewing security currently, where the masculine pole is really viewing it as all of these like physical playing arrangements. And the feminine is describing security as all of these emotional plane arrangements. It's like, I want to make sure that when we have a rupture, there will be repair. And it's not that that's not important to you, but it's one of the first things I think of is that you are consistently who you say you are, and that we are going to be able to make it to the other side of things. That's how I started describing security yesterday. And it seems that I mean, it's definitely true that both layers of security are important to all
Yeah.
humans, but the fact that it isn't automatically described in the same way feels important.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, right? Because when it comes to like physical security, like security of my body, I cannot rely on you in the same way that you can rely on me,
Mhm.
right? So there are some differences between genders. Now, when it comes to things like financial security, yeah, if that was the life that we were living, you could provide for me financially, right? But on that physical, like I'm bigger, I'm stronger, right? If anything was to go down, I would be the first line of defense, right?
Mhm.
So it's interesting that there are some differences between genders. And then I think but that is a capacity that you could build,
Mhm.
like you could train in combat and become really dangerous, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so I share that because usually women are more skilled on the emotional side of
Mhm.
providing emotional security,
Mhm.
right? Like you are more urgently approaching repair most of the time, not
Mhm.
all of the time,
Mhm.
right? But just naturally, you have a greater capacity in that than me.
Mhm.
Now, just like you could become a physically dangerous woman, I can become and have become a fairly emotionally intelligent man where I have
Mhm.
the skills where I can also contribute to that bucket of emotional security.
Mhm. Yeah, and understanding that we can all I mean, it's not doesn't really feel like my path to become a
Sure.
physically dangerous woman, but I appreciate you honoring
But you
that.
could.
I could train it. Yeah. But understanding that, there are different aspects of security that are more on the surface important to each individual is great. And then honoring that, this is where we've talked about this in the leadership podcast, that is where you are leading our security. This is where I'm leading our security. But then one of the misses is that there are a lot of women providing for their own, not necessarily like physical safety if someone tried to physically attack me. I'm sure I would respond in some way. But as far as like housing and income and stability in that way, most females are independent in that way because of movements that have happened over time. And this is where I think there's frustration in the imbalance in the way that men are showing up to also provide emotional security.
Yeah, I think women have come a longer way in providing that financial security for themselves than men have become in creating emotional security. And it's a cultural shift. There's like the boss babe thing and the strong independent woman, right? So women have like really built that capacity, right? I think that it's a more obvious thing, right? It's like people need that to be able to live. You know, I don't necessarily need emotional skills, security, intimacy in order to survive. I do need it to thrive. So we talked about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like on the bottom, there's those physiological needs like shelter, food, and the resources to be able to gain those for yourselves. So women have got that, right? And then higher up on the hierarchy of needs are the emotional needs, right? And because those aren't required, like men are very much like what's needed, because that's not needed, and we'll argue that it is to have a loving and passionate relationship. There's been less responsibility taken for that. It's easier for men to excuse themselves from that because they are the financial provider. And so there needs to be a similarly powerful cultural movement, and I think it's brewing, of men coming online to the emotional skills needed to create real security.
So we're talking about, or we have talked about how you are creating physical space security for me. This trip is just a really good example because I said, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't really feel like participating in the planning of this. Can you do it? And then you did, and that was amazing. But I'm curious how you feel I provide emotional security for you, or how, the female in the partnership does provide emotional security for the man.
Yeah, when we look on the feminine leadership side of things, it is you seeing the unseen, right? So if there is anything in the field that's disrupting our connection, or I am dysregulated and not conscious of it, you will pause and bring it to the surface, right? Say what you're noticing, ask me questions, allow me to understand what's there, right? Because the longer that I don't understand my dysregulation, the more likely it is that it damages our connection or creates a rupture. Right. So it's like you are like pretty vigilant on that side of things. Like you are really the guardian, And I also think that when it comes to repair conversations, when we are working through something, you see more of the details than me, right? It's like you kind of have like the eye of a hawk in that regard. Like I might catch most of it. I might think that we're done and we're complete, right? And you'll be like, I think there's one more thing, right? And this is it. And so you're very attuned to like, okay, is the loop actually closed? Whereas I am like, I think we did pretty good. Like I think we can move on, right? You make sure that everything is sealed so that we don't have to relive that.
Thank you for explaining that, because what I'm noticing as you explain that is how often I haven't done that in other relationships because of fear of lack of safety, whether that meant, physical safety, or it meant lack of safety in the way that I would lose the relationship that was, helping me create safety through attachment. And what I noticed in those experiences upon, hindsight is that nothing was ever really fully repaired. And so everything loops when nothing is repaired. And this is a place that people get frustrated in their partnerships of like, why do we keep having the same conversation over? But things only loop when they're incomplete. If something is fully complete, then it won't loop. Or, maybe there is a way that something circles back, but there's more wisdom to be gained. And what happens, I think, when the way that the more emotionally attuned person in the partnership, the way that they create security isn't honored, then they stop, and in the surface level, it might feel better that they're not it's pretty uncomfortable when we're having a conversation. I'm like, nope. And also this, and also this. Okay. The air still doesn't smell clean. Like, what are we missing? But then we move to completion in a way that I never really have before in other partnerships. And that being willing for both of us to be willing to go through that discomfort because we have the bigger picture on creating security overall is really amazing. And it does feel like that gets numbed because the larger, stronger, more masculine presence in the room is the person who creates both physical safety and security. And so if there isn't an acknowledgement of that, or there isn't an acknowledgement of like the strengths of the feminine side, they will like easily get numbed out of fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And as you're speaking, another important part of creating security is coming online, and it's related to the way that the masculine and feminine can support each other in really unique ways, and especially unique ways in a partnership where there is the ground for security. And so what's important is that the feminine partner protect the masculine partner from themselves, and that the masculine partner protect the feminine partner from themselves. And I'm just going to use man and woman as we continue this conversation. But how can a woman protect a man from himself or from his masculine shadow?
Well, I would love to hear your share. The biggest thing for me, I think, is not that piece I was just talking about, like not being afraid to speak up when I'm sensing something in some way.
Yeah.
For the female not to be afraid to say something's wrong here, even if they can't tangibly speak what it is, because it's that sense of something is out of alignment that leads then to the curiosity and the discussion for us to talk about, oh, like this wasn't fully in love, or actually this wasn't fully in alignment for you, even though maybe for a second it felt like it was. And so to me, the biggest way that, I might protect you from going astray is just as soon as I notice something doesn't feel right, even if I don't know what it is or how to describe it, saying it.
Yeah. I think a masculine shadow that's present in the collective is that men can be very bullish. Like I can get very set on something. Like I'm really excited or I'm hyped up or there's a lot of energy and I'm like, I think that I need to go do this thing right now. And you're like, just like, wait a second, either there's too much emotional activation for you to go do that thing from a grounded place, or there's too much activation for that to actually be a grounded course of action. Right. So, and that's a really hard thing for women to do, is like interrupt that masculine drive. And it's a hard thing for a lot of men to receive. And it's not always the best course of action. Sometimes it is right action for a man to drive into whatever that thing is with like full force and full commitment. Right. And sometimes he needs the support of his woman at his back. So it's an art of doing that, not so much a science.
Well, and I would argue also that if it is truly right course of action to go fully into a thing, pausing for a moment won't change that.
Yeah, and maybe there's just an edit to the approach, right, that your woman can provide, right? So it's not always a no. Sometimes it's a refinement.
Yeah. Well, and two, like I don't think that I'm perfect at this yet. I think we're all always trying to master this art, of guiding one another. But unless something feels truly like a no. If I say no, that's like pretty severe. That's definitely like, we need to listen. But most of the time, it really is just and only needs to be, hey, can you check in with yourself for a second?
Mhm. It's like, before you send that 5-figure transfer, can you just like sit with it and
Uh-huh.
make sure that you send it from a place of clean energy,
Right.
you know? So the flip question
hmm
is, how can a man protect his woman from herself?
The best way that I have experienced you protecting me from myself is containment and the acknowledgement of like when something is true versus not.
Mhm.
We talk about the differences in the way that we communicate, and sometimes I communicate in very roundabout ways as the feminine and also as an external processor. And you're much better at being like, this done, this done. And so there are sometimes where I need to go on a little bit of a ride to find my core. But there have been a few times in our partnership where maybe a wound has been activated and my mind or my heart start telling a story that really isn't relevant here.
Mhm.
And yeah, I feel like one of the most loving things you've ever done is say, hey, I don't know where that is from, but it's not from here.
Mhm.
And so that containment of like, this is ours and that isn't. And we can hold that other thing, but we just need to be clear that like, it's not ours.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the feminine can be a bit windy or roundabout or take leaps, right? It's not wrong and it's not right. It's just a different way of communicating. And on the positive side, that dreaming, that fantasizing can be really beautiful, but it can also get really dark. And so it takes a lot of presence and it takes a lot of self-regulation to be able to guide your woman back to truth lovingly. Like, it cannot be abrupt,
Mhm.
she cannot be in a process and you say, stop, this is how it is.
Yeah.
You have to
Imagine.
really, yeah, you really have to kind of step onto that windy trail with her and ask her to notice what's around, and over time bring her back to truth,
Mhm.
right? And you mentioned, like, much earlier in the podcast, this survival response that, plenty of people have, plenty of women have, of like, flee.
Mhm.
It's like being able to lovingly work with a partner who has that survival response and help them understand that, like, security does exist here and it's not something they need to flee from, creates security in the relationship and helps protect her from kind of the darker shadows of the feminine.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to commitment and flight patterns as well, actually, because I think, you know, even though we're talking about all of these different ways that we can create security for one another, ultimately, if that flight pattern is, it doesn't matter if it exists. Like, it may be true that the impulse or the intrusive thought of flight comes up when someone's dysregulated forever. I haven't lived long enough to say for sure we can totally get rid of a survival response that's not relevant.
Mhm.
But to choose whether you're going to engage with it or not can be worked with. And the truth is that security can't really exist unless commitment exists. And there are plenty of people going on their spiritual and healing relationship journeys where it's like, as long as we're resonant, it's a yes. And that is great for a time because it creates some freedom and some release of pressure that I think has been programmed into people. But ultimately, in the end, if what you want is, a partnership that has unshakable love, then you have to be willing to commit to a foundation that's unshakable, which only occurs if you stop choosing to engage with the idea that fleeing is the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Creating security, there's a independent piece of this that needs to happen. A lot of the healing and the work
Mhm.
can be done in the relationship, but each partner needs to be doing independent work to create an awareness of their survival mechanisms, of their protective responses, to change their relationship to those so they know when they're happening in the relationship. They know how to care for themselves, right? They're not reliant on their partner to care for them during that piece. That creates codependency, which is also not secure, though it can really feel like it. So like each partner needs to create true security, each partner needs to be doing some work outside of the relationship too.
Have you ever, I guess maybe we talked about this a little bit on a different podcast, but would you describe yourself as someone who previously had commitment issues ever in any phase?
Yeah, I think I swung both ways. I think, there's a previous episode of this podcast. I think the title's like the villain arc, where I
Mm,
talk about my history during college of, yeah, the whole story is on that podcast, but I was hurt by someone. And then for years, I didn't commit to anyone past like 2 to 3 month flings. So that happened. And then the way that swung when I adjusted and decided that I did want to experience partnership, it became codependent and it became enmeshment,
mhm.
right? So I think that I swung both ways in my
Yeah.
past.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't think that I would have ever described myself as someone that was like afraid of commitment or was like gonna run away from things until probably like a year and a half ago or a year ago when I realized, oh, this thing we're talking about where like there's always a threat of leaving was a loop that an old partnership was on. And I didn't really realize it until being on the other side of that was the error, you know? And in my own experience, I have histories of relationships that didn't feel safe, either like physically or emotionally or energetic. And so then arriving to a partnership that actually has a lot of safety is a huge recalibration to be like, okay, I've said this to you before in our journey of like, but at some point, maybe you'll change this authenticity story that we're talking about before of like,
Mhm.
in my experience, the person that I historically fell in love with became someone else over time. And I think that's why a lot of people end up with commitment issues, because they've seen that play out either with their parents or in their own partnerships of can it really last? Like, can the love that's felt in the
Yeah.
beginning really last? And so unwinding my own narratives and taking responsibility for where in those past partnerships was it my error for staying too long. And then also, being honest with myself that staying really is the desire now. Like
Mhm.
I talk about this a lot in the addiction work that I do, but as long as a back door is open, there will always be an option to take it. So whether that is someone with addictive tendencies or someone in a toxic partnership or something they would deem a healthy partnership, but they're always thinking about leaving. It's like if the back door is open to return to something or to leave something, we will always walk through it because that path is so much better traveled. And so, really being honest with ourselves about am I in a phase of life where I am ready to close that back door? And what do I need to do to close it is really essential for that security to ever come through.
Yeah. You mentioned this fear of this desire to leave the back door open because of fear that this person will become someone that you didn't know them to
Hmm.
be. And I want to share that authenticity doesn't remove change. In fact,
Hmm.
change will be present in the relationship. Both partners will change.
Hmm.
And hopefully not no change that's like, okay, my mask comes off and now I'm a monster, but change in the way that I'm gonna grow and learn things and the way that I see the world is going to change. And security encompasses change. Security
Hmm.
expects change. And security says that if and when you do fall out of resonance, you make a concerted effort to come back into resonance, right?
Hmm.
There's a few people that I've talked to that have been married for 20 plus years. One of them is my coach, and he said, we've been married 3 different times. They've never got a divorce, but they've had 3 different marriages, 3 different relationships, 3 different pairs of roles that they played for each other. So when we talk about union and creating really long-term relationship, which is what we're here to do with each other and what we're here to help others do, that needs to be included and expected.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for clarifying that, because the wound that I had is really like this person and I were resonant, and then over time, the mask came off, and it was actually that we were never probably resonant.
Right.
But the commitment and the security is built with someone who, like, that resonance is true, which authenticity, is the only way to really see if that resonance is true. And it can be hard to unwind those wounds, to unwind those fears. We've talked a little bit before about like the night phase of men, where it just isn't in the path of the phase of the night to be fully committed to a partner, because he's mastering his craft and exploring his freedom and things like that. And that being honest with, for in whatever body or form you're in, of if you're in a phase where like, the question is not, do I want to find my long-term partner? It's, am I able to really be in commitment in a way that builds security? Because the two aren't really the same. It's like everyone wants to be in love. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But the effort that it takes to unwind our patterns and to, experience a flight response and be like, no, I'm not engaging, like I'm staying when it's hard, and figuring out how to rebuild security if it's lost is a completely different experience than just like, oh, we're in love and it's great.
Yeah, maybe this is a conversation for another episode, but guys in that night phase, they'll, of course, they want to experience connection. Of course, maybe they even want to be in a relationship, right? But they're honest about that from the jump of like, hey, I'm not really looking for anything long term, but I like you and you like me. And let's just have fun and like explore and like see where this goes. Right. And too often that agreement turns into, oh, we've got to be together forever. The plot gets lost somewhere along the way. And I think that there actually can be some security in those more casual relationships. But it's even more important that there's honesty at every single step, right? Like if one partner is starting to like dip into that more serious area and the other isn't, it's over.
Yeah. It's interesting. As you're saying this, I'm wondering, can security really be created without commitment? And are there different ways to create commitment? So for people who are not ready to be like, no, I'm fully in this for ever, can we say, I want to try this out, but at the end of 3 months, we're going to reevaluate, like create some containment about it so that there isn't a wondering over that time. And there is okay, well, we said we would try this out until June. So we're in a rupture right now. Let's figure this out. And then June comes and it's like, okay, I wasn't like we agreed in the beginning. This wasn't a long-term thing. This has been really amazing to experience and it's complete. Seems like an option to titrate security.
Yeah. And during those 3 months, here's what you can count on me for.
Right.
I'm not going to entertain anybody else. I'm not going to ghost you. I'm going to take you out, so that they know what they can count on you for. I think security can be there. But I also wonder, like, hey, having that level of maturity to be like, we're going to explore this for 3 months. Here's what you can count on me for. At the end of the 3 months, we're going to have a conversation to see if it continues. I don't know if that type of person
is in the night phase.
Exactly.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, so then, I mean, we've said this before too, but it comes back to their partner or the person who's exploring romantic relations with them, of not getting lost in the plot. If someone says and shows how they can or can't show up for you, believe them. And if it isn't creating security for you and security is something that you want, then that's the end. But being willing to unwind and to know what phase you're in feels important. I have one last question for you before closing stuff.
Great.
You've provided a lot of support for me in this process of unwinding some of my flight fears. And I know with certainty that the amount of security and safety that you were able to provide while I went into my wounds and my mind is part of why I was able to unwind them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a unique experience, So if someone, male or female, is in a partnership with someone whose, default is flight, or who is saying like, okay, I know this to be true, and also I have all of these fears, like what feels like beneficial tools for their own process and then also to support the partner.
Yeah. You're a special case because did you have that flee response? Yes. But you were very committed to working on it, right? And you were very responsive to my attempts to support you in that, right? So this isn't like carte blanche advice that, if she flees again and again and it comes up again, that you need to stay and betray yourself through that, right? The way to heal it, to help her heal it, is to stay and to stay unequivocally, to stay without letting any shred of I also want to flee come through, right? But what I just said of like, you are not healing her, you are helping her heal. So if she has no interest or effort towards healing herself, you leave. That's toxic. That's unhealthy, right? But for a woman who is, if you do have a woman who is devoted to you and devoted to her own healing, it is simple presence. It is in those moments where she really needs support. Don't make it about you. It is all about her. You will have like fears come up and doubts come up, and those can be addressed in a separate conversation. But when her system is running hot, you are there to be the rock, the masculine rock.
I'm wondering if the same would work if it were flipped. Like, there's definitely the cliche of like the man won't commit and the woman stays too long. But if it were true that the man was the one, experiencing desire, like the impulse to flee, and wasn't, I never left, there's just like an internal response happening. So he's not actually leaving, he's staying, but he is devoting time to unwinding it. Do you think the same would occur if she was just like, okay, baby, I'm here with you?
I think what's more important is the partner who wants to flee having devotion.
Yeah.
Right. Because a man can want to flee and, a man can want to flee because there's sexual experiences that he hasn't had in his life that he wants to experience that aren't with this current person. I just want to be free. That's different than I have some adverse childhood experiences that are creating this reaction in me to run that I actually want to heal. And like, I actually do want to be here. It's just hard for me.
Yeah. That's a great differentiation.
Yeah.
And there must be not only devotion to the partnership, but devotion to the healing process. Like, the idea that the sensation will just go away isn't accurate.
Right.
There has to be a deep dive into the experience, the fears, the whys, the sensations, and really unwinding those things on that own person's journey, and then sharing them with the partner as relevant. But if someone is expressing fear of commitment or is expressing desire to flee and they are just saying like, give me time, but they're not actually taking action, then that is not a space that's going to change.
And they really must desire secure, loving union. It can't be like, oh, like that seems like a nice thing to experience.
Yeah.
But also what's nice is having one night stands and hookup culture. It won't work. Like, the vision really has to be grounded in them for romantic love, because the work that needs to be done is pretty arduous and often painful. And to be able to go there has to be like an anchored vision.
Integration work.
Notice where you're making any of those common mistakes to creating real security.
Mm.
If you're hiding anything, if you are, repeated threat of leaving or empty ultimatums where you are not keeping your word. And if you are in partnership, share this podcast with your partner, have a conversation about where you've made those mistakes and what you're committed to moving forward.
Mhm. Yeah. I think also doing a little bit of reflecting on what security means to you.
Yeah.
We've shared what creates a secure relationship and what security means to us and how we teach it, but having a deep understanding of what security means to you as an individual, how you desire to provide security for your partner and how you desire your partner to provide security for you is great if you are single to create a vision. And
Yeah.
also, in this conversation of partnership that you're talking about, having an aligned vision.
Yeah. And as a sub prompt, how do you contribute to physical security?
Mhm.
Maybe if you're the woman, you become really dangerous and carry knives. Uh, I'm just kidding. You could. And how do you provide emotional security?
Great.
Great. Thanks for listening. Before you go, make sure that you leave a rating and a review and follow the podcast. Definitely listen to this with your partner or your first date. You can make the second one a little bit awkward or maybe even a better experience for all. All right. Love you.
Love you.